ugly pulpit. President Joe Biden addresses the nation as midterm elections draw near. We're at the White House. Nuclear safety. Atomic officials evaluate war damage at a weakened facility in Ukraine. China and Taiwan. Why a noted analyst warns about signs of escalating conflict. We speak with Gordon Chang. And inspirational Irish art. A bishop celebrates a new exhibition at the Vatican. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, September 1st, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this Feast of St. Giles. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden travels to Pennsylvania to give a primetime speech, but his remarks about the, quote, soul of America could alienate Republicans, especially those who support former President Donald Trump. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Tracy, with the critical midterms in November moving in fast, President Joe Biden heads to Philadelphia, speaking from Independence Hall. No doubt he'll highlight his legislative achievements, but he's also going to lay into people he calls ultra-MAGA Republicans.
Just a week ago at a political rally, President Joe Biden tells the crowd that MAGA Republicans don't believe in democracy.
The MAGA Republicans don't just threaten our personal rights and economic security. They're a threat to our very democracy. They refuse to accept the will of the people. They embrace political violence.
And heading into his speech tonight in the city of brotherly love, expect more verbal assaults like that. In the White House press briefing room today, this preview.
This speech, just to give you a little bit about what the speech is going to be about, it's going to be optimistic.
But today, the Republican National Committee tweets, watch, the language and rhetoric that Biden Democrats are using is dangerous. They posted a video over a minute long that calls Democrats unhinged. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris travels to Durham, North Carolina, touting the Inflation Reduction Act.
So last month, our administration gave Medicare the power to negotiate with Big Pharma on behalf of our seniors.
This as employers are still urgently seeking workers despite a weakening economy and high inflation. Also today, First Lady Jill Biden speaks at an event launching the Apprenticeship Ambassador Initiative, helping connect employers with future workers, paid on-the-job training in all sorts of industries.
You know, registered apprenticeships provide clear pathways to jobs that pay good wages.
Now back to the president's speech in Philadelphia. GOP leader Kevin McCarthy tweeted today, Joe Biden doesn't understand the soul of America and that all he does is vilify tens of millions of Americans. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Democrat Mary Patola has defeated former Republican Governor Sarah Palin to win a special congressional election in Alaska. The 49-year-old becomes the first Native Alaskan and the first woman from the state to serve in the U.S. House. Meanwhile, the former 2008 vice presidential nominee will still have an opportunity for a rematch in November's election to win the seat for a full term. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has led an inspection team in Ukraine to Europe's biggest nuclear power plant. It comes amid reports of clashes between Russian and Ukrainian forces this morning. The facility has suffered damage from the war, raising fears of a radiation leak or reactor meltdown. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky greeted children in a classroom today to mark the 190th anniversary of the country's Day of Knowledge. The school visit comes 2 days after renewed Russian shelling struck the city of Kharkiv, killing 4 people. Poland wants Germany to pay it back for the damage and destruction caused by World War II. Poland's top politician demands $1.3 trillion in reparations, but Germany says the issue was settled long ago and its position has not changed. Taiwan says that it has shot down a drone believed to have been sent by China. Military officials in Taipei say the drone entered restricted airspace. In response, Taiwan fired flares and warning shots. After the drone maintained its position, it was shot down. Tensions have been running high since U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan last month, and longtime China observer Gordon Chang feels the situation may get worse. And we go now to Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, great to see you as always. A lot of concerning developments right now when it comes to China. In fact, earlier today, I know you tweeted this, Taiwan has called China's bluff by shooting down one of its drones today. The next, say, 24 hours will be crucial. Why do you think, Gordon, the next 24 hours could be pivotal, and what has you so concerned?
I'm concerned for a couple of reasons in general. We have seen, for instance, China today ignoring the warnings of John Kirby, the NSC coordinator that were delivered yesterday, decided to take one of its drones and hover it in sovereign Taiwan airspace. That's an extremely provocative act. They left the drone there even after warning shots were fired. And that shows that Beijing wants to provoke a crisis. Now, Henry Kissinger a couple of weeks ago said, look, the United States was already on the edge of war with Russia and China. Things have gotten much more tense since then. And it's not just Taiwan. We've seen troubles in India, Japan, the Philippines. This is a regime in Beijing that wants to provoke a crisis, and it's undoubtedly going to succeed.
Yeah, and I know Taiwan has said it's facing severe military challenges. What are some of those issues, and what do you think the U.S. can and should be doing in this situation?
The reason why Taiwan is facing military issues is because we have purposefully, over the course of decades, kept Taiwan's military weak. And this was wrong policy on our part. And it's wrong policy of the Biden administration and the Trump administration and the Obama administration, and going back a long way. At this particular time, what the United States should be doing is Biden, instead of attacking Republicans, he can attack Republicans all he wants, but he needs to also declare in public that the United States will defend Taiwan. If he does that, that will go a long way to deterring China. And we should also be pre-positioning military supplies and maybe even troops on the island. We do that, Beijing will huff and puff, but it will not want to take us on.
Yeah, and apparently China and Russia, they're taking part in some war games right now. What more do you know about these joint military exercises? And what do you think the signals, Gordon?
That's the Vostok, in other words, East exercises. They're held every year. China and Russia have been jointly drilling, not only in the Vostok exercises, but many others as well. They are trying to make their militaries interoperable. They're starting to move in that direction. And of course, China has been supporting Russia's war effort in Ukraine. So if there ever is going to be a conflict with China, we can assume, or we should assume, that Russia will be on the other side. Because we're seeing these two regimes work very closely together, Tracy.
Yeah, and Gordon, I think I want to touch on, I know that earlier this week you called on the U.S. military to raise its alert level to DEFCON 2. Talk to us more about that.
Well, because even then, when the situation was not nearly as tense as today, it was clear that Beijing was looking to look for a fight. And it's not just that China has been engaged in the largest military buildup since the Second World War, but also the Communist Party has been mobilizing China's civilian society for battle. So this is an all-of-society, all-of-country effort. And what we have seen recently with China trying to provoke Taiwan, it should give us pause. We should be understanding that instead of trying to tamp down tensions, which is what we do for decades, that approach has not worked. And we need to try something new. And it's not to say that something new will work, but we can say that the old approach has failed. Biden failed to deter Russia and Ukraine. He's failing to deter China over Taiwan and other countries. So we know where this road leads. It leads to crises and conflicts at both ends of the Eurasian landmass. That looks like World War III.
We have less than about 30 seconds or so left, Gordon, but I want to talk about this. The UN released a report suggesting that China may have committed crimes against humanity. What more can you tell us about this? And also, how do you think the international community should respond?
The word that you mentioned, which should not have been there, is may. China is definitely committing crimes against humanity, and it's committing acts of genocide, as both Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Blinken have said. The United States should be trying to do all that it can, including cutting off trade and economic relations with China, because of its commission of genocide. We have an obligation to do that under the Genocide Convention of 1948. We are definitely not living up to our international obligations.
I'm going to leave it right there. Gordon, thank you so much, as always, for your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy.
Coming up, a religious sister is freed from captivity in a Western African nation. Plus, a victory for pro-life prayer in Germany. An American religious sister is now free after 5 months of captivity in Burkina Faso. 83-year-old sister Sue Ellen Tennyson is reported safe with American authorities. She was kidnapped early last April in the West African nation. 3 armed men attacked the house where she was living, leaving the 2 other sisters unharmed. A court in Germany rules that silent prayer gatherings near an abortion counseling facility cannot be prohibited. The decision lifts a 2019 ban at a city in southwest Germany. The prayer organization welcomed the decision. Church leaders in Connecticut are condemning anti-Catholic comments made by a public school official. An elementary school assistant principal allegedly admitted on hidden camera that he discriminates against Catholics in the hiring process. The head of the state's Catholic Conference calls the remarks, quote, a serious breach of public trust and state laws. The assistant principal has since been placed on leave. A new report reveals the identity of the activists who protested outside of the homes of several Supreme Court justices. Writing in the Daily Wire, Mary Margaret Olohan says the demonstrators have ties to communist groups as well as Black Lives Matter. Laws in both Virginia and Maryland prohibit protests at the residence of an individual to disrupt or threaten the person's, quote, tranquility in their home. Mary Margaret Olohan, D.C. correspondent for the Daily Wire, joins us now. Mary Margaret, great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. So tell us a little bit more about this report.
Yeah, so we decided to take a look at a couple of these activists who have been protesting since May, basically, outside the homes of the Supreme Court justices. And just to put that in perspective, in May, after the Dobbs opinion leaked, these protesters came out to kind of prove to the justices, we're going to intimidate you into changing your mind so that you will not overturn Roe v. Wade. And they were very frank about that. They were protesting. They were saying all kinds of horrible things. They were swearing and nightly protests outside the homes of the justices. And like you said, Maryland and Virginia law prohibits these people from disturbing the tranquility of the justices in their neighborhood, and yet authorities haven't done anything about it. So then we saw in June, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and yet these activists are still out protesting, specifically protesting at the homes of Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Kavanaugh and, of course, other justices. But as we're heading, back into the school season, Amy Coney Barrett's kids are going to school, the Kavanaugh kids are going to school. It's disturbing to see these protests continue. And we know that a man traveled across the country with the stated intent to kill Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And again, officials are doing nothing about it. It's just mind-boggling. So we took a look at a couple of these guys. For example, Nadine, she's been really involved in Black Lives Matter for a long time. She would camp out outside the Black Lives Matter fence with all the pictures on it back in 2017. She would literally sleep there. We've got Sansara. She is part of the REFCOMs, which is the communist group that spends all their time kind of jumping onto these other movements, and they've been accused of kind of hijacking these social justice movements to fit their own purposes. And then you got Sadie, Sadie loves to go to Amy Coney Barrett's house with her activist pals, and they kind of wave bubbles around, they chant these rude things, and they'll talk about handmaids. And they're very active on social media talking about their friend groups that they formed, protesting outside of Barrett's home. And so these are just a couple of the activists that have been doing this. And we thought, why not shine a spotlight on them and show who's out there and, what's going on.
Yeah, very interesting report. Anything else that you found out that really surprised you?
Well, I mean, if you take a look at this kind of things that these guys are posting, it's kind of weird because Roe v. Wade has been overturned, right? But in the wake of Roe v. Wade being overturned, they're still out there. They still want to bother the justices. And so they're basically just criticizing the justices over and over and saying rude things. And one interesting thing we found was that the RevComs, this communist group that kind of infiltrates all these other pro-abortion groups and activist causes as of late, they were really involved in getting Rise Up for Abortion Rights started, which is this group that you never heard of before January because they didn't exist. Well, they got started this spring and were probably the most obvious group at the Supreme Court during these protests when Roe was overturned. Rise Up for Abortion Rights, they were dressed in green. One of their guys climbed up on a bridge in D.C. and stayed up there to protest the overturn of Roe. They're very just kind of alarmist and activist in their tactics. They chain themselves to the Supreme Court fencing. And these guys are not very well liked by the other pro-abortion groups. That was something I thought that was interesting, that when we were digging into this story, they're not very well liked. And people have noticed that their tactics are embarrassing for these other pro-abortion groups. They don't like it.
Yeah, it's very interesting, all the stuff that you've unearthed. I know there was also a study that came out this summer saying that about 60% of Americans want the Justice Department to crack down on those protests outside of homes. What more can you tell us about that? Is anything being done?
Yeah, so this polling done by Judicial Crisis Network, it's really interesting because if that large of a quantity of Americans want the Justice Department to take action to protect the Supreme Court justices, you would think that the Justice Department at least would have exerted itself more to protect the justices. And yet we're seeing little to no action from the Justice Department on this. Now I've been told by different officials that I've reached out to that they're investigating different acts of alleged domestic terrorism against pro-life centers and clinics. But still, we've seen no direct action on this from the Justice Department when we know that Merrick Garland had no scruples in investigating the parents who were saying that they had problems with these progressive school boards teaching really radical concepts to their kids.
Yeah, another thing I want to talk about, speaking of radical concepts, this hidden video that came out about a Connecticut teacher, I think assistant principal up in Connecticut, I believe it's around the Greenwich area. Yes, so basically saying, and I'm paraphrasing, you know, they don't hire Catholics. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Pretty shocking.
Yes, and it is a blatant example of anti-Catholic bigotry. And, you know, I think many Catholics who have experienced this kind of thing, we will talk about it and call it out and say that's anti-Catholic bigotry. And I've heard many in the media kind of scoff at that and say, oh, no, that doesn't exist. You're making that up. This is a very clear-cut example of anti-Catholic bigotry where this school official literally admits Catholics know what they want, they know what they believe, and they're not going to change their mind, and they're not easily influenced. And so he was saying, I don't want to hire them because they're not going to subject themselves to our ideological persuasions. And I think that it's a bravo to Project Veritas for exposing this video and showing the people what an anti-Catholic attitude that is and that it truly does exist.
Yeah, it does exist. And we're so glad that they brought that to light. And thank you for all that you're doing. We appreciate it. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Up next, praying for the health of a newly created Cardinal. Plus, celebrating 3 Irish artists whose inspirational works are now on display at the Vatican. A newly created Cardinal remains hospitalized in Rome with a heart condition. Cardinal Richard Bauer is expected to have surgery within the next few days. His health kept him from receiving his red hat in person during last weekend's ceremony. Ghana's Catholic Bishops' Conference is asking for prayers for the Cardinal's speedy recovery. Well, in the prayer attention for the month of September, Pope Francis says the death penalty is inadmissible.
Moralmente, la pena de muerte es inadecuada.
In the video message, the Holy Father invites Christians to pray for the death penalty to be abolished in every country. He says society can repress crime without taking away opportunities for redemption. Pope Francis also calls for concrete commitment to care for our common home. Yesterday, at his weekly general audience, the Holy Father recalled the World Day of Prayer for Creation and also the beginning of the season of creation, which starts today. In 2015, the Pope made this season of the year official for the Roman Catholic Church as a time of prayer and action for the safeguarding of our common home. Joining us now from New York is Christina Leaño, Associate Director of the Laudato Si Movement. Christina, great to be with you today. Listening to the voice of creation, I know that's the theme for this year. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So the theme is an invitation to listen to the diversity of voices within creation. We recall the psalmist declaring that the heavens are telling the glory of God and the firmament proclaims God's handiwork. But the question is, do we contemplate and really hear this message? And so we're called not just to hear the glory and the beauty of creation, but also the cries. Here in New York, as we've been experiencing drought, I've been noticing, trees prematurely turning brown. And so the call is, what is creation trying to tell us? Particularly voices that are often muted, whether it is nature or communities that are economically poor, indigenous, and what are our actions doing in response to these voices?
Yeah, and the message for this year's season of creation, Pope Francis asked the UN members for the effective implementation of the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change. What are some of the other topics that the Holy Father mentioned in his message?
So in this beautiful message, Pope Francis also calls us to practice an ecological spirituality during this time of the season. He says, and I love this quote, to pray once more in the great cathedral of creation. So inviting us to bring our prayer outside and to see how we can reconcile our relationship with creation. But in his message, he also talks about the need for a communal conversion. As you mentioned, he asked UN members to take action on climate, but also on biodiversity. There's an important UN summit coming up, and there's a need for governments to come together to develop a framework to protect the destruction of ecosystems and species. He also names the need for corporations, particularly naming extractive industries like mining, oil, forestry, to really reflect and to stop destroying, he says, forests and wetlands and mountains. Because he said this is such an urgent issue. And I think many of us, as we're looking at what's going on in our environment, whether it's drought or fires, we see the urgency. And he says in his message, we are reaching a breaking point.
Christina, before I let you go, with the Laudato Si movement, how do you suggest that Catholics and other people make a difference in the world around us?
So, as Pope Francis invites us, there's both the personal ecological conversion that we can commit to. So looking at our own personal lives, our consumption patterns, what are we eating? And then, as Pope Francis mentioned, there's the communal conversion needed. So can this be a time I reach out to my parish about joining the Laudato Si Action platform, which is a Vatican-sponsored program to get institutions to go full sustainability in the spirit of integral ecology? It's also a time to advocate to our government leaders about these important topics of climate and biodiversity, particularly with the upcoming UN summits arising. And last, there's a number of suggestions and events that you might join that are available on the Season of Creation website at seasonofcreation.org. So invite you as well to check that out and see how you might really live this season of creation.
Oh, wonderful. Christina, thank you so much for your time today and speaking with us. We appreciate it. God bless you. And finally tonight, we get a closer look at an Irish art exhibit taking place at the Vatican. The exhibition features works from 3 artists based in Dublin. They created sculptures, paintings, and works of glass representing everything from St. Francis to the Nativity. Irish Bishop Paul Tighe praises the artwork. He serves as secretary for the Pontifical Council for Culture.
I think art at its best can be an inspiration for people in their faith and in their Catholic faith, but I think also just for faith in general, for faith in life, for faith in goodness, for faith in the beauty of what we find around us.
The exhibition was curated by a filmmaker who was inspired to explore Irish artists who had work on display in the Vatican. Bishop Tighe says the art reflects the goodness of God. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.